Good evening. I'm JJ,
I'm CJ,
and we are the Radio Twins.
and this is ENT.
Nope, the Radio Twins Experience. Um, if you ever want to check us out or hear us live with the radio show, which is the Radio Twins ENT Radio, you can always check us out Saturdays at 3 p.m. and all you got to do is go to
www.TheRaydioTwins.com. That's TheRaydioTwins.com.
If you want to follow us, you follow us, we follow you back. If on social media, we're on X, formerly known as Twitter.
I still call
Instagram,
it Twitter, whatever.
TikTok, you name it, we're on there. It. Also, if you ever want to check out our apparel line quickly, you can always go hit the tab on TheRaydioTwins.com. It's called BornToWinStore.com. Mm-hmm. Hit that tab, you'll see all the hoodies, hats, all of that good stuff.
We appreciate you if you go buy some stuff.
Right. Now, what we usually do with this particular podcast is it's actually called the Radio Twins Experience podcast. Mm-hmm. And what we'd like to do is we interview interesting people with a background that may help you in whatever it is that you may do.
Right.
And nothing changes from tonight. Always the same thing. And tonight we have none other than probably one of the biggest Ravens fans out there, Hassan Giordano. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening. I hope somebody from the Ravens organization is paying attention.
All right.
They understand, like, I deserve a reward for how much I ride for you.
When I tell y'all, he is probably a bigger fan than I am. Definitely. He goes to just about every game that he can catch. Am I right, Hassan?
Absolutely. As a season ticket holder, they keep giving stuff away to season ticket. I have yet to get anything from the season ticket holder experience other than paying every damn year for my seats. But I'm trying to get something. Like, they giving Super Bowl tickets out every year and this, that, and the third. And I'm like, man, how does a brother get hooked up?
I think you'll get one sooner or later. Sooner than later, put it that way. Well, tonight, the reason we wanted to interview you is because you do a lot in, I like to say PR work, public relations, specifically politics.
Yes.
He's been on news shows, television, might be television shows as well. Square Off here in Baltimore. This man has given his opinion, helped politicians get seats for different positions. That's who he is. Now, my first question would be to you is, how'd you get into what you're doing?
The funny thing is, a lot of this stuff was, it's never was handed to you. Other than unless you were born into a family like with money, that's being handed something. I don't think anybody is handed anything if you really worked hard at your craft.
Right.
But this was kind of like dropped in my lap in many aspects because it was never something that, when I was younger, I was a hustler, right? I was in and out of in institutions, jails, selling drugs, that kind of life on the wrong side of the law. Never in my life that I imagined being in politics at all. In fact, back when I was, 25 years old, I couldn't tell you the difference between a Democrat, Republican, who the mayor was at the time, any of that. From 15 to 25 years old, within that decade, I was locked up every birthday except one. And even the year that I was out on my birthday, I got locked up on my damn birthday.
Right? Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. Spent my birthday in central booking and then came home the very next day. It wasn't a pretty sight, but that's the path I chose. It wasn't like I had to do it. I had a loving mother who raised me as a single mother from day one, never gave up on me. But I chose that lifestyle. And it wasn't until Judge Wanda Hurd, who back then I didn't have a clue who she was other than that person in the black robe that I had to go before with all these distribution charges. Today, she serves as probably one of my closest friends and allies. But back then, she felt like it was three of us that day before. I didn't know the other two. All of us were 25 years younger. And she was like, look, I just feel like I'm tired of seeing my young black brothers go to jail for stuff that they really have no clue about. Like, you don't have any poppy seeds, no gardens, right? We're not bringing in the drugs or the guns into our community. but were contributing to the death of our community. So she gave all of us an opportunity that day, me being one of them. And instead of giving me jail time, she gave me 7 years, all suspended, but 18 months of probation. And I had to go into a recovery program. She was like, if you like to sell drugs, then I'm going to put you into a program that deals with drug treatment and recovery so you can be around those, you sold the substance to. And that was the opportunity. I was put into a program by the name of I Can Weekend. A brother named Israel Kason at the time was running the program. And, he ended up becoming one of my, like a father to me. He was plugged into the community stuff, politicians. There was actually a delegate who lived right behind the program, Delegate Salima Marriott, who I met 6 months into the program, who was the one who actually gave me the opportunity. She was, she felt like, hey, you seem to be smart enough. I don't know where you went wrong, but I'm going to try to help you kind of make sure you don't go back to that path. And she was someone who was a very strong advocate for those formerly and currently incarcerated, right? As a state delegate, she made it her mission to try to help those. And come to find out, when I started working for her, like, jail letters would come to her office like every day. And she did everything she could to try to help anybody that she could at the time. And so, that's kind of how I landed in. I met JJ. Back then it was Radio 1 was downtown on St. Paul Street. And there was a 24-hour marathon for the Larry Young Morning Show. And that's where I ended up meeting y'all, going down there. Larry was down there, and Doc Cheatham and others. And so at that time, there was a campaign for voting rights for former felons currently. But you had a lot of people like Doc and them who had never been incarcerated before. So when I became part of the program representing I Can Weekend, which at the time was the largest recovery program in the city and close to one of the largest in the entire state on the East Coast, they used to tend to want to use, I don't want to say use Israel, but bring Israel on to be, when you have events, you want to make sure you have people there. Well, he was able to turn out people at the drop of a dime. So we were a part of that. And then they ended up making me the spokesperson, because they were like, well, you're directly affected by what this bill would be able to help. And that actually was my entree into the political arena. Went to Annapolis, started lobbying for the bill. The bill passed the first year we were doing it. And then, from there, it's a long journey ever since. But it was definitely a fruitful one over the years. Definitely a struggle over the years as well. Very insightful. Like you said, people I've helped get elected, many of them turn their back on me as soon as they get elected, once they figure out my past prior record. Right? It was like, oh, you helped me get elected, cool, but I can't bring you on board and give you a job, because God forbid I actually help somebody with a record. A few of them did. Former delegate Salima Marriott got me plugged in with former mayor Sheila Dixon, who was city council president at the time, who ended up becoming like my political godmother, and kind of kept it real. And of course, the Conway family, Frank Conway Sr., Belinda, Frank Jr., and now, of course, Ivan Bates.
So I think the one thing that intrigues me about you is you've learned your political background by actually being in it, per se. If you were to compare it, let's just say to us, when we actually went to school for that, and it's like, I love to see somebody on the ground. And since you've gone through what you've gone through and all of the endeavors, do you feel like what you're doing is making changes, or do you feel sometimes it can be a little frustrating at times?
It's certainly definitely frustrating, especially in politics. I love it because I just love the craft of politics, and I love the whole. I'm a big strategy kind of guy, right? 48 Laws of Power, 33 Strategies of War. These are books that I read on a daily basis. That's who I am. I personally like that type of stuff. I came up with it in my entree, even before I got into politics, in the whole, gang life, dealing with even being within the Nation of Islam, 5%ers, BGF before it actually became a real gang, but Black Guerrilla Family was actually formulated back in California to be a protection unit for Black inmates who were being mistreated by white correctional facility officers. But in those particular instances, you're always taught knowledge of self. And really I've always felt like you got to really perfect your craft, right? And so I saw individuals like yourself who went to school and were very knowledgeable about that. But one lesson I found very striking was when I went to Annapolis to serve with Delegate Marriott. She brought me on. I didn't know anything. I'm straight from the streets. I'm her legislative director in Annapolis. And I'm going up there with sweatsuits on and Tim's on, every day. And these people were in suits. And I remember sitting down with then Senate President Mike Miller, God rest his soul, who kind of pulled me aside. And he said, "Young man, you are very smart." He said, "But smart people come and go." And I've seen it time and time again. He said, "Number one, you need to understand that if you're going to be on this level, then you need to kind of play the role, right? So I don't expect to ever see you come back up here with polo sweatsuits and Timberlands on. That's not the dress attire for this particular profession. But number two, always understand that while everybody in here, you may be able to share the book smarts of those who are within this, one thing you have an advantage over all of us, including myself, is you have street smarts that many of us don't have and never will be able to obtain. There's nothing in a book that we can read that can tell us about the streets the way you can." And so that made me realize that day that I had the advantage. Most people who come through that lifestyle and get put into any profession that they, again, hadn't went to school for, wasn't trained on, kind of feel inferior in many aspects because you're like, these people went to school for this, what do I know? And, again, I don't know if it's my arrogance / confidence, it's a big fine line between the two. I never felt, but I did kind of like understand that I had to do 2 or 3 times more because there are people who, they've been doing this for 20 plus years, went to school for this. And so I always within myself said, I must perfect my craft. And, I realized early on that politics was going to be that. And then when I started getting into radio and communications, more so talk radio, I realized that not, anybody can be brought on behind a mic, but it was only certain people that really made it, like that really stood out. And like you had to have this niche, like, and that kind of helped you be who you were. And, that ended up becoming the Mr. Politics brand because it was like, okay, well,
And we respect was because you were in it as opposed to us in the classroom and learning about it. You were actually learning while you're in it. And that's why we respect that.
When was the first time someone reached out to you, like a station or whatever, and said, "You know what, I want your take on this election or that election or
this particular situation"?
Right.
That's a good question. I know. So I got to give credit where credit is due. I wouldn't have really known about and become familiar with talk radio had it not been for Larry Young and y'all at Radio One years ago. He kind of brought me on as a representative of the program, talking about some of the legislative stuff we were doing in Annapolis, fighting for voting rights. Right after that, I ended up becoming the state director for voting rights for former felons because there was a national movement at the time being funded by the Jet Foundation, OSI, and others. And they ended up funding Maryland. And then they made me the national spokesman because they were like, oh, okay, well, you seem to have a gift for gab and you're, directly affected by this. You should be. And it was at that time that we ended up having our own radio and television show. And that kind of got me into media. But I think the first station to really bring me on as a political analyst was WEAA. At the time, it was Mark Steiner and Anthony McCarthy. And they had heard me talk about politics before, like on Larry's show or on my show that we had. But at that time, I had started working for Kwesi Mfume in like 2006. And, I knew politics, but I still didn't have my like niche there. I didn't really know where I was going in the media part of it. And his longtime communications director, Mark Clack, pulled me aside and he said, "Look, brother, you're very talented. People tend to follow what you say in the office and when we're in the streets." He said, "But I see your writing. You have a unique style, but you ain't got a clue what you don't. Look at, I didn't go to school for that stuff. So, the punctuation, like it flow, like anybody who used to read my stuff was like, yeah, I know that's Hassan just based off the writing style. But they also realized, like anybody who read it, it was like an English major. Like, what the hell is this guy doing? You know what I mean? Like, I really didn't have it. And he kind of helped kind of mold me and craft and help me craft my, perfection, like kind of try to perfect my craft and trying to write better. Then the Examiner gave me an opportunity right after that because I was doing the blog for Kwaizi's congressional campaign. He's running for U.S. Senate back then in 2006. After that, the Examiner gave me the ability and brought me on as their political reporter for Baltimore. They were trying to compete at the time with the Baltimore Sun, so they were trying to find new reporters. And then after that, that's when EAA kind of reached out when they started seeing me, kind of report on the political stories. At that time, it was the 2007 Baltimore City Council races. And I started kind of put my 2 cents in, and that was the first time. And actually, when I met Mark Steiner and Anthony McCarthy, and became lifelong friends with Anthony ever since, and pretty good friends with Mark as well.
Where does DMV Daily come into play with that too?
Well, it's interesting. Right after that, in 2008, I met a guy named Chip Dizard, and Chip was a great guy. He worked within the Baltimore City school systems. He was like, "Hassan, you really need your own television show." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds good, but I don't know how we're going to get to that." He said, "Look, we have this great studio. Like I run all of the communication stuff for the school system." He was like, Digital Harbor has this brand new studio that is like, it has the props, the background stuff. Like it's like like a television station, but they teach the kids in here. And he was like, "So I'll be the producer. We can come to the studio and let's just set up your own show." And we did it just kind of as a, all right, let's try it out. And that's where the Reporters Roundtable kind of came out. And that year, 2008 through 2010, that's when we started like putting all that together, put the show together. We were coming on local stations that you can bring on for free, like Charm TV and stuff. And this was before the online era, right? It wasn't I think back then it was like MySpace, right? It wasn't Facebook and all that type of stuff. So it was a lot harder to really get stuff out there. But that helped kind of put my name out there. And then once people saw that I like kind of fell in love with the production side of television and radio. Right after that, I met a guy named Jason Rodriguez, and Jason, him, and Andy kind of said, "Look, there's a boom that's going on, this online thing. And so we need to have like an online media source." So they were like, "You wrote for the Examiner, you had the television. Let's do something," because Andy was really good with building out websites. Right? He was like, "Let's put together a website that's dedicated to the DMV area. And like you can be like the CNN." I remember him saying this when we were sitting. He said, "We're going to be the CNN for the hood." So like Jason was like, "I'll just follow you around with a camera. You can just talk about the politics, and we can be on the ground reporting every time something happens, a shooting, whatever." And we were like, "All right, cool, let's do it." And that's the start of, we were like, "Well, what do we name it?" And it was like for days, we kept trying to think of like a cool name. And it was like, we knew we were going to report on the DMV. So I was like, well, we're going to do it every day. Let's just DMV Daily. And they were like, "All right, bet." And so we did it. That was like I forgot what the website base was, but it was one of the only websites that you could, at the time, there was a blog on it. There was like, so you can go on it. It was like a social media news site, right? So social media wasn't big back then. Like you had Facebook, you didn't really have Twitter or X, whatever the hell you want to call it these days. But it was a way that we felt like, well, if there was a site that you can go to, that you can read the news, but also like socialize with your friends. We thought that would be innovative. So that's when we created that. And, you know, I guess it was more, it never really hit on the social side of things, but people started reading it. The more and more I started running into people, they were like, you know, it was funny because back then I thought attacking people and kind of shining the light on the bullshit in politics kind of was the way, because everybody was talking about it. It was like, boy, you read what Hassan just wrote? Like, that shit is explosive. But it was also a time that I had to learn really about journalism, right? I had to learn about myself and realize that it's not always the negative, even though to get you hits, it's not always great for you as a person, especially your career, right? I made a lot of enemies.
But one of the things, and the reason why I brought that up is because first I wanted to say thank you, because we used to write for your website, the entertainment portion of it that we didn't mind doing. But what I think, I wouldn't say, well, yeah, you were saying you made enemies, but I think you made them because you were telling the truth with most of them.
And what we respected about what you were doing with DMV Daily was we were just like you at one point, where we weren't as politically astute. And then when we started hearing different people like Larry Young and you, per se, you had this vibe of you, I don't want to say aggressive, but you stood your ground and you said what you needed to say, and you did it in a way where, even though you at the start of it you were, as you said, creating enemies, but at the same time we took that as like you had your ground and you knew what you were going to talk about and how you wanted to push your agenda of what you were talking about across to the listeners and viewers. So do you feel like sometimes it may get frustrating sometimes when you feel like, okay, they really didn't understand exactly what I was saying and I'm trying to get my point across? Do you get to that point sometimes?
I think the more frustrating part isn't that I've come to realize that most people don't care about politics the way I do, right? Most people have lives and everyday lives that politics is not a great part of that, and they'd rather kind of leave that alone. So I had to realize that when I'm reporting on the political side of things, that I wouldn't say, I hate using the term dumb it down, but I had to keep it on a very granular 8th grade level, right? And in media, they'll teach you that you're not up in the skies. Keep it at a very 8th, 9th grade level, because not everybody has finished high school. Not everybody understands these big old fancy words. Just keep it real simple. And so, that was always my philosophy, the KISS method: keep it simple, stupid. So I always try to keep it simple and kind of be the voice for people who weren't up here in the clouds of politics, but were people that can understand common sense, right? Because I think a lot of times, a lot of those political reporters that I found, at least, seem to be like, they thought they were better. I won't say thought they were better. They spoke a different language that the average person was like, what the hell are you talking about? Nobody cares about that. Like, just give us the reality of it. And that's what I tried to do, is just kind of give the reality of it. Like, I don't want to hear the double talk. Case in point, there was a time where I remember Larry brought, for the National Action Network, he brought Senator Joan Carter Conway and Senator at the time Catherine Pugh to their meeting that night. And the session had just ended in Annapolis. And they were talking about how great of a job they did when they were in Annapolis and how frustrated they were with the gas tax being passed. But they also got money for schools, right? And they were trying to act as if the reason why they passed the gas tax, which nobody liked at the time, was based off the vote for the school system. And who's going to argue against, putting money towards our children? But that wasn't the truth. And I knew it wasn't the truth because I was on the ground in Annapolis during the time. And I knew that their vote for the gas tax came way before the education vote and had absolutely nothing to do with that. And at that time, I made it my business to make sure I knew what was connected to what. So I blew them up. Like, at that meeting, they got mad because I put them on blast and said, you're absolutely lying. And then I went on Larry's show as his Annapolis reporter and told the truth the next day, which again, in that aspect, I didn't mind making enemies, right? Because I'm telling the truth. And whether you want to try to sugarcoat it for your constituents, I don't care if you get mad. I think the biggest regret I have in kind of quote unquote making enemies was there was plenty of times, I wouldn't say plenty, but there were times that I chose to take shortcuts. And I mean that in saying I had a source that would tell me this is what happened in whatever political debate it was, whether it was a vote or whatever. And I never corroborated that one source. I would say, oh, really? And never really got the side of the person that I was reporting on negatively. Like this person did this because of.
Mm-hmm.
And even sometimes kind of elaborated a little bit too much on what that person commented, right? So they may say XYZ and I might add the dot to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of give it the emphasis. And I realized after a while that that's it's sensationalism in journalism, right? And at the time, I was like, okay, deal with it. But I also afterwards, I kind of, as time went on, I realized that even though it wasn't like I was lying about stuff, it was like I felt some kind of way because I felt I kind of got the reality of people who just made it clear to me. This is why I don't want to fuck with you, right? Because of X. And I had to accept that and realize that maybe that's not the best way of reporting. There's other ways of getting out your story and with the same impact, with the same following, but without the negative connotation to it, right? And so I chose to kind of go a different route. So when we kind of came back and revamped the DMV with a live stream podcast, I chose to kind of go a different route. I was still the same Mr. Politics. Nothing really changed, but other than I chose to try to be as thorough as possible to give all the different sides, but still jam it down their throat and not sugarcoat any of the stuff that an average politician would.
So how did you make the strong transition from what you were doing then to public relations, helping people get seats, politicians get seats or win seats?
Well, I was always in the background doing that. I think that was really my love and forte is campaigns. If you asked me to make a decision, I would choose doing campaigns over anything, right? Because it's just the art of strategy. Like campaigning, that's all campaigning really is, right? Is the art of war. Like how do you ensure that you succeed by any means necessary to many degrees, but there's a lot of different pathways to victory in different campaigns, and you have to figure out the best way to get there to the end goal. And so that was always my passion. It was a little disheartening because, again, there would be individuals that I would help from day one, with field strategy, direct mailing, whatever the case may be, communications. And a lot of them weren't connected to the streets. So they would use me, especially to get to those voters that they knew they wouldn't be connected to, right? It wouldn't be the super voter per se, but it'd be the voter that comes out every now and again. But that would help get them over the top. And so, I found that a lot of people don't, unless you've been in politics, you have no clue and no idea on how to run a campaign successfully, right? It's going to take you a minute.
Because I don't.
And that's another.
But we find it intriguing.
Right.
Really
Very intriguing.
But what I found was, even when I would help these individuals, kind of get to the end goal, and many times I would do so without charging or charging what I normally would because I put the personality into it. I felt it was more of somebody I can believe in. So I'm not going to charge you and understand they didn't have it. And then I would end up getting burnt because I'm like, if in politics, you're either going to charge what you can and move on and treat it as a business. Or in some aspects, you say, hey, I'm not going to charge you this because my end goal is you get into that office, then I know I got a job in that office, right? And depending on the influence of the office, that could be beneficial.
Right.
But a lot of times with that end goal in mind, and an agreement between me and the elected official. It wasn't like this is something I'm dreaming of and never told them. This was an agreed upon mutual agreement. And then when they get in, it was like, yeah, but I didn't know you had this lengthy criminal record. So I'm not sure I could really do that. And I was burnt by that time and time again, to a point that I started to really doubt the sincerity of some of these individuals, right? And I was like, yeah. So then I just said, okay, no problem. Then I'm just going to charge you an arm and a leg. I'm going to charge you what I know I'm worth.
Right.
And I don't give a damn if you get in or not. I mean, I want you to get in because your success is my success. Right. But whether you hire me or not, I don't care, right? Because I got what I was supposed to get out of it, right? And that's what really kills me with people these days. They charge what they want you, their going rate for whatever service they're providing you. And then the person wins and they expect something from you. Now, if you've charged your going rate and it was never a quid pro quo, don't worry about that. But when we get in, we got you. Then don't expect anything on the back end, because you don't, you know what I mean? Like, I would have never cared if the agreement was, we're going to pay you your going rate, what you're asking for. Okay, that's cool. Then at the end of the race, then I move on. I shouldn't expect anything after that. But it's the individual who charges that, and then afterwards expects the world. It's like, we paid you to do a service. You did your service. Now it's time to move on. Now, if the politician then still chooses to bring you along with them, that's an added bonus.
Right.
But you can't expect both. I never did, but again, the former isn't the best, because I've been burnt plenty of times by people who've used my criminal record as a pass, as a roadblock to them bringing me on. But I think it was all for in good reason, because now, for those who did give me the opportunities, from Sheila, from the Conways, and now Ivan, people see my talent, they see my worth. And so now, I'm telling you something. For many years, people at McDonald's was getting paid more than I was. But I had to grind it out, because I had always had a plan in mind that I have to build. Like, I knew I had a background. I knew I had a past. I knew I didn't go to school for this. So it wasn't something I could put my resume on, and say, I deserve this. I knew I had to work 10 times harder than the next person. So I decided to be able to sacrifice many times in order to get, to the level of achievement that I have today. And so, it took some time, but God has been good.
Now, and you figured out the game. That's a lot right there.
Because then after these, I'm gonna suggest you say what you are currently doing, but hold that thought. We have like certain statements, and you just fill in the blank. All right, what first comes to mind? Okay, all right. I could never have predicted
that I'd be where I'm at today.
The key to happiness is
family.
You will never regret
doing what's best for you.
But you might wish you had
did a little bit different.
I think you got exactly to where you are now because of you not changing things. But I think that I have to disagree with you on that, even though it is your answer. No, don't get me wrong. But me knowing who you are as a person, even behind the scenes, is cool. You're a cool guy, and you work hard for everything that you've gotten. So. But the biggest risk I ever took was
getting into politics.
I hope people will remember me most for
my father, like my children. Like, that's my biggest, to me, that's my biggest goal and accomplishment to date, is trying to raise my children, my boys.
Right. Remember when he won the oldest was way shorter than you. Now he's almost taller than you.
He's about as tall as y'all now.
Right. Never be impressed by
the glitzy, fancy, shiny object over there that's in front of you. Many times that's what we aim for, and that distracts you from the real goal. And I had to find that out plenty of times along the way.
Definitely.
That's not always what it's cracked up to be.
And now I'm gonna mention two names in Black history, and you tell me what's the first thing you hear, or what's the first thing you think when you hear that name. All right, Malcolm X.
The greatest that ever did it.
Clarence M. Mitchell.
One of the greatest that ever did it, on a more local scale.
Okay, all right, thank you. What is it that you do currently?
So right now I serve as the chief of external affairs and right-hand man to State's Attorney Ivan Bates here in Baltimore.
That you are as get him in the seat, right?
Yeah. You know, that journey was interesting because the first time he ran, he would have got elected if it was for me. But I was busy running a campaign for clerk of the circuit court, and I really didn't have the opportunity or the time to help him out. And I think it helped him because he saw what politics and again, he didn't know what he was a lawyer. He never did a campaign. He was never political. And so he got a taste of what the political game was, right? What campaigning really is about. And it kind of taught him a lesson on, how to do it better. And so that brought us into last year's campaign. And after the first campaign in 2018, I said, look, we're about to revamp this DMV Daily stuff. We're going to do this live stream podcasting. And the problem was in the 2018 is a lot of people in Baltimore didn't know him. He knows a lot of people. He defended a lot of people in Baltimore. So there was a real group, a lot of individuals who did know him, but a lot of the voters just didn't, right? Where they were going, he didn't have the Mosby name, right? Household name. And so I said, look, we're not Fox 45 or anything, but we got enough following that you come on our show and we're going to make you a household name. So you're going to co-host with me and we're going to start to revamp your name in the political realm. Like your name is good in the legal realm, but we got to get you known amongst voters. And that was kind of the strategy coming out of this first one. It was, let's get on, let's do this. We did the radio, the live stream, all that. And so when it was time to come around to last year, the second campaign, he found a lot more people who didn't know who he was when we started hitting the doors. And a lot of it was from the show. A lot of it was from different things that we did between those times. And it was really gratifying. And I think if you ask him, he would say the same. He wouldn't trade in the first loss for anything because it kind of taught him a valuable lesson, got us to where we're at. And I'm going to tell you right now, the first time I'll probably say this anywhere publicly, trust and believe, Ivan Bates, the state's attorney, is not the last stop for Ivan J. Bates. We got bigger plans for him in the future.
Okay. Now, if people wanted to get a hold of you or get in contact with you, how would they do it? Social media, numbers, all of that.
I really hope they don't. Very private right now.
Right.
It's not. But I mean, I'm on social media. Hashtag Mr. Politics basically pops up everything that you need to know. Fortunately, social media helped me brand that. So anybody, I've yet to meet anybody that has anywhere close to that branding of the Mr. Politics. So we put a hashtag Mr. Politics. That'll pop up. But I do think I'm thinking about one of the questions you had. There's one thing that I do want to mention that I think is one of the prouder moments that I had along the way was during that process, and I kind of overlooked this in many aspects. I probably shouldn't. I realized how impactful policy is. And so one of the things that got me really into politics and known, especially amongst legislators, was I wrote and crafted the bill Voting Rights for Former Felons. That is the current state law now that allows former felons the right to vote as soon as they come home. Mm-hmm. But so that was the first law that I ever wrote and got passed on my own back in 2007. And then I started just like writing bills and getting people to introduce them for me and getting them passed. And that was just like, to me, it's no better feeling. Like right now, 18-year-olds can run for city council in Baltimore. Never before could it have been done. You had to be 21 years of age to run. But I just felt like 18. If you can vote at 18, you can go to war and die for our country at 18. You should be able to run for office at 18, right?
Right.
City council ended up passing it. The voters decided in 2012 that they would get behind that. And so that's law now, right? Because of something that everybody was like, man, you crazy. Yeah, we ain't doing that. It get done. Now we're trying to do it statewide because right now you have to be 21 to be a delegate and then 25 to be a state senator. So we're trying to, I've been trying to just been not as focused as I needed to be, doing every other thing else. And then changing the law for independents and third party to be appointed to local boards and commissions was another one. So, I take great pride in some of the policies that I helped craft, write, and get passed. I just don't really talk about them as much as I do everything else.
Right, but we definitely want to say, first of all, congratulations. You just recently got a Black Men Unifying Black Men Award, if I'm correct.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
One thing I've known about you is that you're humble and you don't really like talking about a whole lot of, whatever you do. You don't like to talk about it. That's another reason why I wanted to interview you.
And continue to wield your political pundit power, because literally you like a man, you run through it. And what I've noticed about what you said during this interview is it's always been a continuation of, I might not understand it or know it right now, but I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to push through it and get through it. And you do.
Definitely.
So much respect on that too.
And again, we want to say for taking the time out to be interviewed by us.
Right.
Because I think in my mind that I see as well, you're a very busy man. So, and just the fact that you did that. And I would hope down the line that you would start up your show again so that I could probably be your producer again.
Right. And keep fighting that good fight, because
right.
Sometimes those voices that we as the public don't hear are probably the best ones that do all of the fighting behind the scenes, and people just don't know it. So
definitely. And again, thank you for taking the time out to be interviewed by us.
Right.
Go Ravens.
Absolutely. Let's go Ravens.
All right. I'm gonna let y'all have that. Seattle Nation.
Thanks, Hassan.
Thanks.
All right.